You know, I've just come across, and I'm laughing because I've come across the editorial cartoon in the Daily Nation, and now that you have introduced us or introduced the subject of these bipartisan talks, we'll get into that. I saw Ochumi release a statement saying, Allah, Kwani, what happened to cost of living in these talks? This is the editorial cartoon on page 16 of the Daily Nation. The salaries counter is closed. I see civil servants have sat just before that counter. But the counter for reasons, the counter for excuses, and the counter for stories are open. Let's take a look at the editorial cartoon in the Star. And this is theirs. After the long weekend, I see on one side of the table Kenya Kwanza. The other side is Azimio. Azimio has one sheet of paper, I assume, with their demands. On the other side, we see William Ruto has an in-tray filled with the wage bill, cost of living, and revolved funds. But before we take a look at the cartoon in the editorial cartoon in the Standard, let's take a look at the statement that was released by Okwa Uchumi. And they say the truce between William Ruto and Honorable Raila Odinga should serve the interests of all Kenyan civil society organizations under the Okwa Uchumi campaign coalition. Welcome the recent truce between President William Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga, which has helped to contain the weekly demonstrations. This is an important step towards restoring economic stability in Kenya, particularly at a time when most Kenyans are struggling to eke out a living occasioned by the current global financial crisis, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, and the present debt crisis we are in. Some of the issues they raise, they say they call for greater public debt accountability, and they also call for the effective address of the cost of living. We equally expect that the truce will effectively address the cost of living, which affects majority of Kenyan households, particularly as it coincided with the new tariffs announced by Kenya Power, which saw a rise in the cost of tokens by up to 19%. And this is despite a promise made by President Ruto earlier this year that the cost of electricity would significantly reduce to accommodate the harsh socio-economic reality facing most Kenyans. And they raise other issues, including the cost of education, and on it goes. But should this, in your view, Annette, have been the top of the agenda outside of electoral reform? Should this have come first? Discussion, debate, this truce, these bipartisan talks. Before we even get into who should be involved, should the economic agenda have been top of the agenda, in your view?
Absolutely. And I think it's the expectation of every Kenyan that the high cost of living would have taken the center stage of this bipartisan conversation. But again, before we even get to the bipartisan conversation, we have seen a trend where when it comes to politicians, it's about their interests. And at this particular point in time, I would want to say Article 1 of the Constitution is being dealt a blow. And much as the article states that as Kenyans, we can exercise our sovereign power through directly or indirectly, and by indirectly it means that we have delegated the power to the politicians or to those in parliament to be able to discuss on our behalf. But history has shown us that that is not the case. Usually what happens once we elect leaders, they go to serve their own interest and those of their parties in most cases. And the situation that we are in right now, even as the bipartisan the adoption of bipartisan approach to address outstanding issues is being agreed to by all and even by Kenyans. I think we really need to delve deeper to first of all understand what is the agenda. It does not, it shouldn't be a conversation that excludes the interest of the common mwananchi. So previously, as a nation, we have seen in the 2007, 2008 post-election violence, we saw the adoption of the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation, which after 2 years we saw, or 3 years, we saw the outcome being the progressive constitution that we have today that has provided for human rights and national values and national values and principles of governance, a lot of freedoms under the Bill of Rights. Again, we saw the same conversation in 1997 during the national multi-party elections, when there was a contest of the same elections. A similar approach to that of bipartisan was provided. It did not yield much. Yeah, in the 2017 general elections, we saw the handshake again. Yes, but this handshake did not again provide a room for interests of a common mwananchi to be advanced. So we have seen in all this conversation, little in terms of reforms has been realized, save for the 2007 and 2008 post-election violence, where we saw the National Accord, the National Accord and Reconciliation Act come to play, and eventually we saw the constitutional development process, which has now given us a constitution that we celebrate as a nation and also just in the region. So I think what I would like to say in terms of this conversation of bipartisan, looking at the history, we are likely not to be able to address the outstanding issues when we leave it to the politician. And that's why for me, it's high time that this conversation is opened up. It should be an all-inclusive conversation. Article 1 should come to play at this particular point in time, where Kenyans, patriotic Kenyans, are given an opportunity to be able to engage. And definitely, we know the saying that goes, if you are not on the table, you are on the plate. We know that our interests as Kenyans are not going to be advanced in this conversation if you gauge from the history of this kind of nature. So the conversation should be opened up, should be able to allow critical stakeholders, be it civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, the professional, the trade, then people in the informal sector should be allowed an opportunity to be able to address the outstanding issues, so that once and for all we are able to come to the root causes that are ailing us as a nation, be it in the political, the economic, and the social, so that we are able to move as a nation forward.